just a very ill commercial sort of, loss versus
A bad investment, in this case, is not automatically corruption.
It invites greater skepticism that the government's commitment towards transparency.
And whether red flags or warning signs were dealt with, were looked into, or were pushed under the carpet.
It is not a matter of abandoning Pakatan Harapan. It's just a matter of not choosing to hold on to the cabinet position.
Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Beyond the Headlines, the go-to space for the top stories that made the headlines and more. I am Amalina Kamal.
And I'm Juliana Jalaluddin.
Now, the Tabung Haji Royal Commission of Inquiry report has gotten us all talking this week and the past week, of course. Billions of ringgit in problematic investments, losses that had to be absorbed, and a government intervention that ultimately prevented from a much bigger crisis from happening.
That's right. And the big question now is not simply how much Tabung Haji has lost. It is who ultimately paid for those losses and whether the institution has really recovered and whether the cost has simply been shifted elsewhere.
Right, Julie, because I think a lot of us tuned in that particular special sitting, right, in Dewan Rakyat itself, which took place last Tuesday.
Right.
So, first, right off the bat, a lot of MPs did question the abrupt termination of Tabung Haji's then chairman and chief executive in 2021, saying it disrupted the institution's reform process. But that has, yet to be explained. I mean,
Right.
whether or not it's true, did it impede the reform processes? We don't know, because these are just things that are being debated. But one thing that was clear throughout the whole sitting was that the money trail,
Yes.
right? The money trail and the amount of losses that Tabung Haji did not report,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
In the initial financial report. This is, of course, before they called for the RCI investigations. And Bersatu President himself, Tan Sri Muhyiddin Yassin, actually called for an independent forensic audit within a year to trace the flow of funds and identify whether or not there's possible fraud, abuse of power, and negligence. Apart from that, BN and PH lawmakers also called for a new RCI covering Tabung Haji's financial period between 2021 to 2025. So basically, the drama does not end in just one report, because they want a full, extensive sort of governance intervention here.
Exactly. But if the first RCI ends in 2020, are we only investigating half of the story?
That's the reason. That's the reason for the
exactly.
call.
So now, Finance Minister Dato Sri Amir Hamzah Azizan said the 14 problematic investments identified by the RCI resulted in estimated losses of nearly 13 billion ringgit. Now, 7 investments suffered total losses. Of the losses, 10.2 billion was absorbed by the government through the 2018 restructuring. Right. So
I mean, we're going to discuss more on this because we do have our experts on set. But
Exactly.
as it is right now, the government has already established, or at least considering to establish a multi-agency task force to coordinate investigations into alleged wrongdoing at Tabung Haji. I mean, some basically remedial efforts are already underway, but I suppose they're looking at a more streamlined sort of a pronged here, right, to address the matter. Because the finance minister too, Dato Sri Amir Hamzah, also stressed that no one found responsible would be protected.
Yeah, and the multi-agencies include the police, the MATC, Malaysian Anti-Corruption Commission, as well as the IRB, right, Inland Revenue Board.
So all this plays a big part in ensuring that Tabung Haji would not face another meltdown, I suppose, or misreporting lah. So joining us here on set is, of course, Dr. Muhammad Afzanizam Abdul Rashid, Chief Economist of Bank Muamalat Malaysia. Thank you so much, Doctor, for being here.
Welcome.
Thank you, Doctor.
Also joining us on set is Ibrahim Suffian, Executive Director of the Merdeka Centre for Opinion Research. Thank you so much, Ibrahim, for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Now, I think the first questions that we want to extend to our guests would be, well, the RCI report was completed years ago, but of course, we all know this, it's only disclosed this year.
Yeah.
How much does that delay actually, affect the public trust in the government's commitment to ensure that transparency and accountability is, put out there?
Yeah, I think the delay in putting the report out publicly does affect public sentiments towards government, because I think the explanation given by the minister that it was to give time for Tabung Haji to administer its rehabilitation program. I think while generally acceptable, but it does speak of suppression of information, and it erodes public confidence that the government is willing to be transparent of matters of huge importance such as this. And I think because of that, it invites greater skepticism that the government's commitment towards transparency, in a sense that if there's bad news or major important negative developments, that the government is less inclined to disclose it rather than make it open to the public space. So I think this is something that the government still continues to have to work in terms of its public information access.
Now, Dr. Afzanizam, that's on the political governance aspect lah, trust towards our administration of the day. But internally, the industry level wise, how does having to disclose the RCI report later affect macam, I don't know, activities within the industry?
Yeah, I think in the grand scheme of things, if you look at the RCI report, it actually revolves around issues surrounding the governance and how this governance has been transpired during the investigative periods, and then what sort of remedies have been executed by the Tabung Haji's management. And of course, when we talk about finance, obviously, in terms of how Tabung Haji recovery plans are being crafted, there are, of course, high degree of complexities. It involves a lot of jargons, SPVs, that kind of thing. Not all Malaysians are savvy enough to really have a full grasp of the concepts. So because of that situations and the timing and whatnot, the impact to the society, obviously the main concern that we read the most is actually what it means to the man on the street in terms of their behaviors. Whether this, in the worst case scenario, it could lead into a bank run perhaps. Okay, bank run means a massive withdrawals in the financial institutions because of this panic. They loss of confidence. The word here, confidence. So when we talk about financial systems, confidence matters because every institutions are interlinked. We have Tabung Hajis within the GLIC, government investment companies ecosystem, because we have EPFs, we have PNB, all collectively about their AUM, their asset under management, about 2.2 trillion. That's 108% of GDP. And we have another ecosystem, the banking system, the capital markets. So all this can be, affected if the situation is not being managed properly. So that's the fear that I would have when this report came out. But of course, and as indicated in the RCI reports, the recovery plans are already in place, and it has already yielded so-called the desirable outcome. You can see that last year, Tabung Haji was able to announce a better dividend rates to the depositors. So these are all measures that has been implemented by the past management that will help to restore the confidence in Tabung Haji.
This is, of course, despite that losses that was not reported. The fact that they are able to also, announce that there's some profit. But there was also, how do I say this, report in the past because it was because they have to raise to provide high dividends. That's also the reason why that smart accounting happened, right? So technically, in the financial punya institution aspect, when you have that sort of claim, because you got to maintain a high dividend, behind the scene, how do you have to rationalize? Maybe lowering down the dividend impact depositors' confidence as well. Tapi kalau, if it's for the long run, and for you to not do the smart accounting aspect,
creative accounting they call it.
The creative accounting aspect, shouldn't it be like a no-brainer thing? Yeah.
Sure. I think we need to have a clear distinction lah. When it comes to accounting standard, Tabung Haji, they have their own set of we call it punca kuasa. They have their own act, Act 535. But when it comes to accounting standards, if it banks, banking institutions, they have a kind of a quite standard kind of accounting standard where they really apply to everything, such as the Malaysia Financial Reporting Standard, MFRS. But in the case of Tabung Haji, they are governed by their own act.
Right.
So that perhaps creates some degree of loopholes during those periods, and that loopholes will be addressed during 2018 by the new management when they adhere with the accounting standard that is more acceptable by the financial institution industries. So on that note, when they apply with this new with this MFRS accounting standard, of course the gaps becomes more prevalent, and that creates the further discussions about the stability or the issues regarding the governance of the past management. Yeah.
Right. So, Dr. Afzan, who ultimately are paying for these losses? Because, Tabung Haji is depositors or maybe the taxpayers?
Well, if you look at how the rescue plan are being crafted, they created the special purpose vehicle, SPV, called UJSB, Urus Harta Jemaah, which is owned by the MOF. And the plan was to transfer the problematic assets to UJSB, and UJSB in turn issued the sukuk, which is the debt instruments, 2 series of sukuk. So that arrangement has allowed Tabung Haji to go back and focus on their business.
Okay.
Where UJSB, on the other hand, will focus on the recovery of those problematic assets. So that plans really change the way how Tabung Haji is being managed, because that allows Tabung Haji to focus on their mandate, which is to manage the pilgrimage operations, and at the same time to manage the depositors' funds.
Okay, but do you think it's fair that we call the institution rescued?
Well, definitely there's some degree of interventions by the government, because essentially when UJSB issued their 2 series of sukuk, those sukuk are being guaranteed by the federal government. So there is a fiscal response as a result from that recovery plan. So I think the fiscal implication, the potential fiscal implications are there.
Dr. Afzanizam, a clarity in that breakdown. Like sometimes it's not as clear cut as that, right? So usually in the industry level or in terms of the accounting aspect, when does it? I mean, at what extent does it actually reach into that level? Meaning already taking that money lah.
Yeah, I think we have to look at the scheme is being crafted to design for the rescue plans, which involves the creations of the special purpose vehicle UJSB, which is owned by the Ministry of Finance, and it involves the issuance of 2 series of sukuk, and along the way there's an exchange of assets, the bad assets from Tabung Haji to UJSB, and those sukuk issuance is being guaranteed by the government, by the Ministry of Finance. So that's the link between the public funds with these schemes. But the main question now is whether those guarantees have been crystallized. And thus far, I think it has yet to translate any forms of realizations. And as mentioned, we have seen some good tractions in terms of Tabung Haji's net assets now has been growing to last year 3.2 billion, and they have been recording consistent profits in the past 5 years. That allows Tabung Haji to give a competitive dividend last year. So in that regard, I think the impact to government coffers when it comes to these plans has yet to be materialized. And also, and on that note, is being the impact is quite manageable, I would say.
Right.
I mean, okay, I want to drive this further because of the whole plugging that this Urus Harta Jemaah is doing for Tabung Haji, right? So they bought assets that's valued about 9.6 billion ringgit for 19.8 billion ringgit, right? But then economically, was this actually the right way to protect depositors, or did it effectively transfer the cost of Tabung Haji's bad investment into the government's fund? Because I just want to press on the whole taxpayers aspect.
Sure, sure.
Yeah.
As I said, the link between the federal government finances are there through the guarantees mechanism, but the whole scheme, if I can relate back to the past experience, if I can relate back to during Asia financial crisis in 1997, 1998, where the government established another special purpose vehicle back then called Dana Harta, Pengurusan Dana Harta Berhad. So basically their job is to receive or take all these bad assets from the bank, because during that time, the main issue was high non-performing loans experienced by the banking institutions. The NPL ratio was as high as 20%. Now we only saw our NPL around about 1.4%. Yeah,
Wow.
that's the mechanism back then lah. So I think I would liken the mechanism, the methodology is quite pretty much similar to Dana Harta, and of course if you look at the past management during 2018, it was helmed by the managing director of his name is Datuk Suzuki Samad, who also a former managing director of Pengurusan Dana Harta Berhad. So he knows the mechanism, how to draw this the plan. Yeah.
Interesting. Bank Negara had reportedly issued 5 warnings about Tabung Haji's deteriorating financial position, but yet the problem still persists. So, how much of the eventual financial damage could have been prevented if those warnings had actually been acted upon?
Even the first warning to
Right.
right away.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
And
Nip it in the bud.
Yeah,
of sorts.
yeah.
Well, I guess as mentioned, I think the problem lies with the punca kuasa, the powers that governs Tabung Haji, because they have their own act, Act 535, and Bank Negara is outside from that scope. The only thing I think that it links to Bank Negara because it involves financial institutions, and Bank Negara is offering their so-called advice and their views about the current states of Tabung Haji, because it, as I said, because it involves banking institutions, it involves money markets, it involves capital markets. Of course, those are the things, areas that will relate back to Bank Negara. So they also have some vested interest to ensure that the safety of the Tabung Haji institutions, and hence their advice. But whether the management back then would heed up the advice is different story lah. So it's about the rules and governance that rule the institutions such as Tabung Haji. There's some. Obviously, Bank Negara is outside from that scope. Yeah.
May I say that I think there's one important distinction to highlight is that a bad investment in this case is not automatically corruption.
I did ask this particular question to Transparency International Malaysia's Raymond about like, how do you differentiate between just a very ill commercial sort of loss versus an actual influence of political standing, you know, of or actual corruption then. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just like ill, macam you take the wrong risk versus somebody actually having to calculate the move.
Yeah.
The gap here, I think it has been identified under the RCI reports, is the skill set possessed by the top management, such as the chairman. I mean, the previous chairman was of course politically linked.
Yeah.
But when it comes to the skill set, when it comes to financial industries, perhaps those are the gaps. They mean clear gaps lah. And compared to now, we have the present chairman Tan Sri Abdul Rashid Hussein, who is well known when it comes to financial industry. So he's a proven skill set when it comes to dealing or handling or managing a financial institution. So the skill gap, perhaps one of the key areas that being highlighted in RCI, and it's been reflected by the gaps when it comes to financial performance.
Okay. Now, since we talked about the 5 warning letters that Bank Negara itself has issued to Tabung Haji without any sort of response, We did get Transparency International Malaysia's president, Dr. Raymond on it, and on a few other things. So we're going to segue to that and come back to the set.
End of the day, we are dealing with public funds. There should not be any political interference. There should not be any forms of conflict of interest. There should be proper appointments based on merit. And once we have that in place, responsibility, accountability, proper reporting structures, and decision-making has to be put down in paper in the right manner and done in the right manner. Now, of course, where BNM can scrutinize the administration of these funds, and they had also previously written letters to Tabung Haji to address their concerns as to the depleting funds, assets, liabilities, and how the funds are being managed. Now, it's not only about BNM. Of course, Jabatan Audit Negara had also come in with certain findings and certain recommendations to put through. Were all these taken into account? Now, even though we have other institutions taking their respective steps, scrutinizing what is necessary, the proper governance that need to be put in place to ensure that such recommendations were indeed fulfilled, and also provide assurance as to not only things are put down in paper, but also practiced in actual form. Right, so you got to ensure that such institutions of such magnitude would need to be first insulated from political interference, and number two, it would need to follow proper governance structure with the roles, responsibility, and of course accountability measures which are well established.
Okay, so which brings me to the other question, right? If the warning signs were already present, especially during that financial crisis period, so what should the Auditor General then have expected to identify?
We should not technically fare an unqualified audit opinion because, again, it is not guaranteed that no misstatement or wrongdoing exists. It's not an auditor's job to find for fraud or to find for any form of misconduct per se, because they would depend on the evidence provided to them. What was the audit evidence considered? Whether professional judgments were made, and whether warning signs were adequately addressed. I mean, those are the questions that we need to ask from the Auditor General's report. I think we can't simply frame it as how can the Auditor General miss this out, right? It comes back to the question of whether other forms of other duties and other responsibilities have been fulfilled. Take, for instance, what would the management, what is the management responsible for? At PH, the management is responsible for making sure that the proposed and approved accounting treatments are done right, impairments, valuations were assessed in the right manner, and what information did management have on the underlying investments before agreeing to make such investments. And we also had the board. Now, the board and its governance committees, on the other hand, they would need to know, they would have to now tell us what information were presented to them, right? Did they exercise their fiduciary duties or fiduciary responsibilities? It must be to question, challenge, and to exercise independent judgment. So it's not only on the National Audit Department, but I would want to scrutinize what is the type of evidence that were considered and what was the professional judgment, as I mentioned just now, and whether red flags or warning signs were dealt with, were looked into, or were pushed under the carpet.
At what point does a questionable investment actually become a potential misuse of public or depositors' funds here? How, I mean, since you mentioned that you have forensic experience, right? But what indicates that there is that misuse? Or because people need to understand whether this misuse actually happened or whether it's just purely a commercial investment that has gone wrong. You get what I mean?
Every investment comes with risk, right? We have to accept that. And investigations only starts if there's one of two things. Either they are red flags or they are whistleblower reports. In terms of whistleblower reports, I would just name it as allegations, right? So here, if they were already red flags as to certain overvalued investments being done or certain transfers of asset being done at values that did not make sense to the current market, that should be examined, that should be questioned. And it can only be questioned if this information is made public. If it's not made public, there should be select committees that would go through such findings or go through such red flags and question as to what is the rationale behind it. And the second part is on allegations. If they were allegations, they were reports through whistleblowers and whatnot, it cannot be just swept under the carpet. It needs to be looked into. And when there are allegations, now we have a more narrowed scope for investigation. And you either need to prove or disprove that particular allegation in order to carry on with normal business. We cannot leave it as it is. Again, there are also instances where allegations are simply made of based on hearsay. There's no proper evidence, there's no proper, proper substance per se. But then again, this can only be distinguished if an investigation is done. Hence, I would say a simple thing is this. If there were red flags that were identified, it should have been looked into. If there were allegations, they should have either proven or disproven each of those allegations to ensure that this does not rise to being bigger than the scandal that we allegedly have on our hands at the moment.
But when an institution is actually managing failures in public deposits, especially entities such as Tabung Haji, where should accountability ultimately lie? Do we need to have that kambing hitam? You get what I mean? Or there should there
Yes.
be a complete overhaul when it comes to the structure of Tabung Haji? Because in the RCI, it's already detailed in terms of what needs to be done. Even the
Yeah.
the roles of the finance minister as well as the religious minister should be separated and also taken out, because the taken out aspect too is like active politicians should not be part of the board. So with management, the board, the auditors, the ministry, which needs to have higher accountability?
They all play their role here, but not automatically and certainly not equally. Again, accountability must follow responsibility, authority, knowledge, and evidence. Here, okay, what I'm trying to explain here is this. The most significant institutional finding of the RCI here, we're talking about reported 3.4 billion profit versus 1.4 billion loss that had relevant accounting standards not even fully applied. Now, this is talking about approximately 4.8 billion in difference in the reported result. Now, that's much bigger than a technical accounting issue here. It raises really fundamental questions about financial reporting, board governance, audit, institutional oversight, and of course, potentially political influence. Let's break it down, right? So, for example, for the management of Tabung Haji, what do they need to know? They will need to approve relevant accounting treatments, how impairments and valuations were indeed assessed, what information that they looked into for underlying investments, and whether the proper due diligence and the risk assessments were done. Then we look at the role and responsibilities of the board and its governance committees, for example. The question is what they knew, what information they received, and whether they exercise sufficient challenge, because it is their fiduciary duty or responsibility here. Question, challenge, exercise independent judgment. Was that done? And then we go to the audit function, right? When we talk about audit function, of course, I think I've mentioned just now about the role of the National Audit Department, and it's not wrong for them to give an unqualified audit opinion. But then again, what were the audit evidence considered, whether professional judgment were made, and whether warning signs were adequately addressed. Now, talking about ministerial and political accountability, which is a big part of the RCI report, or big part of the findings. A minister cannot automatically be responsible for every accounting decision, of course. But then again, the RCI examined the extent of ministerial powers and political involvement and recommended significant governance reforms, including what? Restriction of active politicians serving as TA chairman, board members, or directors or subsidiaries. This cannot be done. Political interference, therefore, cannot be treated as a side issue. If political considerations can influence appointments, investment decisions, distribution, or institutional priorities, that itself becomes a major governance risk.
Now, Doctor, I think the bigger question that a lot of people are wondering is whether or not Tabung Haji has fully recovered from this particular situation, right? Because it indeed reported itself to, having attained a 98.58 billion ringgit in assets against 95.63 billion ringgit in liabilities. So with deposits and dividend rates recovering, can we generally say Tabung Haji has recovered financially? What are some of the markers that is needed for us to actually say, I'll give that green light?
Yeah.
And not just take it face value, because of course the RCI report came about.
Right. I think as mentioned in RCI report, one of the key areas they be highlighted is the net assets, which turned into negative lah in 2016 and 2017 kan. But okay, looking at the latest number that we saw in the Tabung Haji annual report for 2025, because they shared the 5 years figures from 2021 until 2025, you can see that in terms of the net assets, it continue and persistently record a positive balance. Last year, they have recorded net assets totaling about 3.2 billion compared to 2.9 billion in 2024. And then in terms of profits, in the past 5 years, they have been consistently recording profits.
Right.
So we have positive net assets. We have rising and consistently rising profits. So on that note, whatever they have announced in terms of the dividends is legit. And not just that, they have been adhering the international standard when it comes to accounting standard. They have been applying the MFRS. So that itself explains the confidence that we should have towards Tabung Haji.
I think the only reason why we've asked this particular question is whether or not we should actually distinguish between, the institution being financially stable today versus are they still having to make sense of the underlying losses that have not been fully accounted for, right?
So now the RCI has now exposed billions in losses and ignored warnings from Bank Negara and the government rescue involving more than 10 billion ringgit. But the public still doesn't have a clear picture of who will ultimately face consequences. Do you think is there a danger that Malaysians will conclude that once again there is accountability and for the institution but not for the individuals per se?
I think we're still in the early days of this disclosure. That I think following on from the exposure of the RCI results, at some point there has to be accountability assigned to individuals. I think key challenge here is to actually uncover that while there are systemic issues, institutional problems that Tabung Haji has addressed over these years, but individual responsibility over the problems I think need to surface and needs to be dealt with. I think is going to ensure whether or not this issue is going to be resolved successfully in the eyes of the public, or whether it will follow the long-standing perception that problems and mismanagement are suppressed, institutional blames are assigned, but individuals get away scot-free.
That's interesting.
Well, 7 out of the 14 ill or problematic Tabung Haji investments too have been revealed to completely face total losses lah. But then with Al Rauda alone accounting for 1.86 billion ringgit of that loss, does this actually change the political significance of the RCI when Malaysians are actually wanting more clearer picture in terms of the scale, not just on Tabung Haji punya decisions, but every single thing, every layer, the appointments, how you make a decision, the I don't know, like what is discussed in the board meeting, things like that. So
yeah, certainly. I think in the beginning, people are saying that these are not something wrong. This is probably things that went awry because the business processes or business conditions didn't suit them. But I think as more information is made public, as we now learn about the nature and also the very sad outcomes of some of these developments, I think naturally people are going to seek clarification. And in the course of this clarification, the enormity of the problems are now coming to light. Again, like I said, we are still in the early stages. At some point, I think there will be public demand for scrutiny over who was involved in approving, who were the owners, and who else benefited from such transactions that failed so miserably. And I think these issues, dismantles the previous claims that the Tabung Haji financial crisis was an accounting creation alone, that there might be something more deeper, more sinister than that. And I think, depending on how this issues plays out, because Tabung Haji is such an almost sacred institution, particularly amongst the Malay Muslims of this country, the demands, I think, are going to intensify, not just to account for what has happened, but who made it responsible to take place.
About the deeper, it's like something bigger, right? Before that, Al Rauda, as a product alone, do you think the confidence towards it has,
depleted,
faltered, Dr. Afzanizam?
Well, I guess the hallmark of this RCI report revolves around the governance. And clearly, the RCI reports identify those gaps. And, of course, how those gaps are being addressed. So it involves a lot of investments, instruments and schemes that have gone bad. And obviously, as what Ibrahim mentioned about, the public is asking for better clarity in terms of what are the measures being put in place to ensure that these recovery plans would actually yielded the desirable outcome lah, at the end of the day.
Okay. And then there was, in the debate itself, there was a link, especially our Selangor Menteri Besar actually did say about like whether or not it's like this is just like an entry into a bigger scandal because there links to like whether or not ada kat YMDB or SRC, right? Is that claim too far reaching?
No, it's not. I think that claim, is given credence. What has been found in Tabung Haji gives credence that what has unfolded in Tabung Haji is not a one-off pattern, that there is a recurring pattern of mismanagement and misgovernance that has taken place in previous instances. And I think the data now, as it unfolds, I think shows that previous restructuring measures, basically did not address these problems, and that I think in the longer term, some form of reform is needed to ensure that this sort of things doesn't occur again.
Ibrahim, earlier, because we pressed on the question of whether or not, like when the government says that it's going to account for at least 10.2 billion ringgit of whatever was losses, of course, the bigger question was that whether or not does that involve taxpayers punya money lah in that sense, right? But in this particular case, because we already did ask Dr. Afzanizam, we want to get your take. Do taxpayers ultimately bear the cost here when the government says, okay, we're going to absorb that? But should there be further clarity in terms of the breakdown?
Well, I think in this current case, when we followed this RCI from the moment it was originally disclosed, which was during the Negeri Sembilan election, and now as more information comes to light, I think the earlier response to this is a Muslim matter, that it doesn't affect everybody else. But I think as things have now come to light, the 10 billion ringgit bailout did come from public funds.
Yeah.
And of course, I think more clarity is needed in terms of how it was structured, so on. However, it did mean that monies from Hindus, Christians, Buddhists all went to bail out Tabung Haji. And therefore, this is no longer just a communal affair, but it's an affair that affects all Malaysians, because the government had to bail out Tabung Haji to recover some of the lost investments.
Dr. Afzanizam, a clarity in that breakdown. Like sometimes it's not as clear cut as that, right? So usually in the industry level or in terms of the accounting aspect, when does it, at what extent does it actually reach into that level? Meaning already taking that money lah.
Yeah, I think we have to look at the scheme is being crafted to design for the rescue plans, which involves the creations of the Special Purpose Vehicle, UJSV, which is owned by the Ministry of Finance. And it involves the issuance of 2 series of sukuk, and along the way there's the exchange of assets, the bad assets from Tabung Haji to UJSB. And those sukuk issuance is being guaranteed by the government, by the Ministry of Finance. So that's the link between the public funds with these schemes. But the main question now is whether those guarantees have been crystallized. And thus far, I think it has yet to translate any forms of realizations. And as mentioned, we have seen some good tractions in terms of Tabung Haji's net assets now has been growing to last year, 3.2 billion. And they have been recording consistent profits in the past 5 years. That allows Tabung Haji to give a competitive dividend last year. So in that regard, I think the impact to government coffers when it comes to these plans has yet to be materialized.
Okay.
Also, and on that note, is being the impact is quite manageable, I would say. Yeah.
Okay.
Can I ask one, a bit of a sidetrack, one politically might be relevant to this conversation. Why does this RCI matter politically in 2026? Because the report implicates decisions made across different political administrations, right?
And so it's actually very unfair for us to just blame one administration alone lah.
And while today's parliament debate has already become part of the wider Perikatan Nasional, Bersatu, PH punya political contest, Encik Ibrahim, what do you think?
Yeah, I think the conduct of the enormity of the scandal, did span several administrations, and I think one side is trying to put the blame on the earlier administration for not disclosing this, but I think the blame lies across the board over the span of time, that even if it was completed at the point in time of the previous administration. We have had the last 3 years under a new administration when it was not disclosed. So I think, therefore, it goes back to the point on, suppressing bad news and trying to maybe, avoid the difficult questions and trying to kick the can down the road. And I think what it does to the public is erosion of confidence that the government is really committed to transparency and that committed to addressing things until things have reached a point where perhaps disclosing it brings some political benefits.
But yeah, I mean, we saw that in the RCI special sitting, right, in Parliament. Now everything's becoming a political theatre of sorts.
A few days ago,
because what you see now, there's apparently a split in opposition itself. PAS and Parti Wawasan Negara walked out, while Bersatu and of course Syed Saddiq alone having to retain and saying that, for the bigger cause of like the debate, we should just maintain and not let all this nitty-gritty and the little nuances of
disturb the Dewan Rakyat sitting.
Disturb the actual sitting. I mean, nobody wants to gain political mileage through this particular context. But the argument that was made because our Prime Minister is not present then. So, Ibrahim, basically, does this episode actually weaken the opposition's ability to use Tabung Haji as that leverage? And to what extent does it actually benefit the present administration of the day, who actually allowed for the disclosure, the declassification of the report itself?
Well, I think the decision by these two opposition parties to walk out, I think, is a tactical misstep, because they could have actually taken advantage of this issue, and because it didn't really affect them as much, they could actually have used it in order to push for more questions and perhaps, broaden the attribution of blame if they wanted to. But by not being there and arguing, by walking out over a procedural matter about the attendance of the Prime Minister, I think has caused them a loss in terms of public image, because for the longest time, I mean, these parties are the ones that have been talking loudest on the Malay-Muslim agenda, and yet when it comes to a matter of crucial debate, they are not in the room.
Not showing up in that sense. Understood. But do you think the opposition is actually turning the RCI into a different political battle? What would that be then, if it's not the Tabung Haji RCI here?
Well, I think the wider political battle that's unfolding right now and probably will be with us until the next general election is the fight over the soul, the heart and soul and minds of Malay voters, And I think each one is trying to claim that they are trying to be the best defender of such things. And I think for the current episode, I think PAS and Wawasan has, I think, not been able to step up, because not only were they not in the room, but they immediately went on social media and TikTok and put out their points across to the public, whereas they could have done so officially in Parliament.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much both for your insights, especially on the RCI Tabung Haji report.
It can be quite technical, but
I do appreciate both of our guests and their individual sort of expertise here to understand better, because obviously when we read the reports, we only understand what is being, it's just word for word lah. What is a statement, and then you have to read for it. But we have to understand actually, especially the financing aspect here lah, to what extent that it actually impacts taxpayers. Now, don't go anywhere. We will come back with our second segment. But before we go off, I'd just like to thank Dr. Afzanizam. Thank you so much for being here. Hope for us to, bring you back here on set. Or usually it's during crisis mode lah. But maybe the next time is when our ringgit, at least one time to ringgit went higher. And so, yes, thank you so much. Okay, to our audience, don't go anywhere. Ibrahim, you're going to stay here with us. We'll be back. Welcome back, everybody. Now, all eyes are obviously on the DAP Congress that's set to take place this particular weekend at PICC, August 16. And it's actually more than just another party gathering.
Absolutely, Lola. Now, at the center of the Congress is a very consequential question. Does DAP remain in the unity government, or should its ministers and deputy ministers step away from their cabinet positions?
Now, of course, when we discuss about this and debate, obviously, Pakatan Harapan is experiencing a difficult run, especially after the setbacks that had happened in the two state elections we saw in Johor and Negeri Sembilan.
Right.
And obviously, beyond that particular state elections, the growing frustration over whether or not, the coalition is able to implement the institutional reforms that they've promised. But
Yeah.
we also understand that the government of the day's dynamics is not necessarily just on Pakatan Harapan alone, right?
Yeah.
It's a super coalition.
Yeah, exactly. But there's another question beneath all of this. What does DAP actually want to be going into GE16? Is it a party that stays in the government to push reforms from within, or does it need to create some political distance from the government to rebuild its credibility?
Now, still with us on set, obviously, is Merdeka Centre's Ibrahim Suffian. Ibrahim, thank you so much for still being here with us. Now, of course, DAP's grassroots are now being asked to weigh the party's continued role in the unity government. And that's what that's why the Congress is happening. But of course, they've been delaying it. That's one. But that's the first order of the day, lah,
Yep.
right? Let's say, if they do decide to stay, how would that implicate basically the reformist sort of individuals within the party itself? Would they then eventually leave party? Would the party collapse?
Well, I think first and foremost, the current leadership of DAP is under tremendous pressure because beyond Negeri Sembilan and Johor, they also performed horribly in the Sabah state election in November last year. So the pressure is on. And I think the fundamental issue that's affecting the mood of the public, the constituents or constituencies of support is, how DAP being in the government has not been able to push through the reforms that they have promised when they were in opposition for all these years. So I think looking into this particular event that's coming up, it's something where I think the pragmatics in the party want to stay on because it offers them the best chance of trying to extract some minimum commitments and also maybe deliver something before their term ends. But we cannot deny that there are also some segments of the party, not a majority, perhaps a minority, that wants to show that it is serious about reform and that maybe they should step out from the current government because of the compromises the party has had to make with its other coalition partners. And so that, I think, is the tussle between the delegates that are going to vote in this party congress.
Now, Encik Ibrahim, how serious do you think this is? Is this internal pressure for Anthony Loke and DAP leadership? Because does it have the potential to change the party's position ahead of the 16th general election?
I think number one is serious. Serious enough for party to actually call for this event and then hear out the voices from their delegates. But I think first and foremost, as someone from outside looking in, this party congress is actually a valve to let out the pressure from within the party. It's a steam pressure valve operation in effect to let people air out their issues, but also gives a platform for leaders of various persuasions within the party to actually articulate their plans moving forward. And then for the delegates to actually work out what serves best the party's interest moving forward from there. Pressure is real, and also they also have to re-strategize in terms of how they're going to position themselves going into the election, whether or not they want to go in all alone by themselves under their own symbols and their own agendas, or do they still want to be part of a coalition partnership with Pakatan Harapan. I think some form of those discussions will take place. It may not be all completely resolved over the weekend, but I think it's something that people will begin to ponder about the direction of DAP. Will the party collapse? No, it is not going to collapse. Nor are we going to see a very large exodus of leaders to other parties.
Okay.
Well, we do have some insights from former DAP member as well. One of the, I suppose, quite not critical, but constructive in that sense, right?
Yes.
Kian Ming. So we're going to segue into what he has to say and then come back to the set.
We understand that the Congress is a long time coming. It's much awaited. But the first question that needs to be addressed is whether or not it's going to retain in the coalition government or not. And your decision, if you expressed it, perhaps you can explain it further for us.
Yeah, so I think when we go back to the initial call by DAP Secretary General Anthony Loke to ask for a special Congress for the delegates to decide on whether DAP ministers and deputy ministers should remain in cabinet or they should quit. The whole idea behind that call was so that can be used as a tool to pressure Anwar as Prime Minister to deliver more political and institutional reforms. If not, the delegates may vote for DAP to leave. So, we see a couple of months later and a couple of crushing state elections later in Johor and Negeri Sembilan, there has been no attempt or no signal that UNWA is going to do any of the policy reforms that will help PH steer the ship correct. At this point in time, if the delegates were to vote to continue to stay in this cabinet, what Anwar Ibrahim would interpret this to mean is that the DAP is okay with him continuing as it is, with business as usual and with minimal reforms being put on the table either in this parliamentary session or the next parliamentary session next year, if this government lasts that long. So even though there are good reasons for the DAP to remain in cabinet, such as wanting to push through the budget, wanting to have some stability in the context of the crisis in Iran, not wanting to give UMNO an opportunity to pull the rug out from this government. I think for PHs and also DAP's integrity and also their own commitment and bargaining position vis-a-vis PMX, I think the delegates should vote to leave, basically resign from their cabinet positions, and use this as a way to extract some policy and institutional reforms on the part of Anwar Ibrahim.
The suggestion to leave is more on reform pressure, not a lack of support towards Anwar himself. But wouldn't it risk the push for reform in its entirety? Because then you have like a house that's not stable, and it's like you've got like you've progressed 5 steps forward, and then now you're going 10 steps back. These are what critics would say. That how would DP then recalibrate with PKR or the other coalition members here?
So I think DP can say that we respect the decision of the delegates for us to leave, but we will only resign after the passage of the budget. That's going to be tabled in early October, and after the end of the year parliamentary session, where we hope that some political reforms such as the separation of the AG and the public prosecutor, and also the 10-year term limit for the Prime Minister, and maybe even a Eco-Parliamentary Constituency Act can be passed during the final sitting of the year. So this would be a way in which DAP can resign and hold on to its principles, and then at the same time still push for political reforms that will take place hopefully before the end of the year. So that would be my argument as to how DAP can proceed.
Ahead of GE16, what sort of prediction do you think DAP's campaign strategy would be if it's going to be a standalone party, or is it going to form another coalition with new parties, newly revived parties?
Yeah, so Amalina, I need to just clarify something here. When the delegates go to vote to leave or to remain, if the choice is to leave, I think Anthony Loh has made it quite clear that the choice is to leave cabinet, but to still continue to support the Madani government and to still be part and parcel of Pakatan Harapan, right? So it is not a matter of abandoning Pakatan Harapan. It's just a matter of, not choosing to hold on to the cabinet positions, right? And if let's say, this strategy works, and of course there's no guarantee that it will, if let's say Anwar and Pakatan Harapan can deliver some political and institutional reforms in the next parliamentary sitting, then at least DAP can say, okay, this is the direction that PH is heading towards. We want to remind Anwar and also our voters that we are still very much committed to political and institutional reform, and not just holding on to power for power's sake. Then that can be a narrative that there's unfinished business that we need to do after the 16th January election. Right? My fear is that if let's say DAP votes to stay and then it's business as usual, what will happen is that if let's say there are no reforms that will be passed, DAP and PH basically will go into the next general election, the 16th January election, with no compelling narrative other than to try to scare the non-Malay voters to say that if you don't vote for us, PAS is going to be part of government, and there'll be consequences that you'll have to suffer as a result. So I think that is the sort of like gist of what I'm arguing for in terms of the pathway forward.
I mean, it's already been amplified with the past two state elections, right? Can we go into that? Can we go into
Yeah,
your
sure.
analysis?
Yes.
Okay, so the fear mongering of like, okay, if you don't vote for us, then that vote will probably, I mean, if you're sitting out, then you're not going to get the slice of the pie in that sense, right? And in Johor, one particular question was that, I mean, Chinese voters are not voting for them, or are they not coming out? So how would you frame this then towards not the AP voters themselves, but PH as a whole as well?
What we saw in Johor and also Negeri Sembilan is that the Malay voters were very motivated to turn out, almost 80% in both states. And they were motivated, I think, largely because of a very strong sentiment against PH, particularly against the DAP, that the Malay voters wanted to come out to teach DAP and PH a lesson in both states. And the non-Malay voters, especially the Chinese voters, were not motivated to turn out because they saw no compelling reason. Many of them are probably disappointed with PH for the lack of institutional reform, for some of the policies that were implemented that were not very pro-business, such as the expansion of the SST. And I think this trend, there's no guarantee that this trend will reverse in the next general election, meaning there will still be a disparity between the Malay and the non-Malay turnout. Although the overall turnout propensity may be slightly higher among the non-Malays during a general election, I think what PH needs to be careful about is that the higher turnout among non-Malay voters may not necessarily be beneficial to PH, because they may come out, and these are the motivated voters that come out during general election, they may come out to support Bersama. They may come out to even support, let's say, MCA or MIC, because they see, number one, that PH has failed to deliver on its manifesto promises in terms of institutional and political reform. And then secondly, as more and more Chinese and Indians realize that basically the chances of BN and PN coming to power in the next general election is actually very high, they would want to vote for more MCA and MIC candidates moving forward, rather than to put all their eggs into the DAP basket, knowing that DAP will likely end up back in the opposition, right? So I think these are considerations that PH leaders have to be cognizant of with regards to the dynamics of a general election.
What about DAP's appeal on the progressive Malay?
I think for many of the, like you say, the progressive Malay Muslim voters, they would have supported Pakatan Harapan in the past because they wanted more political reforms and institutional reforms to happen in the country. I think for them, a large majority of these Malay progressive voters would not continue to support Pakatan Harapan because of the failure to deliver on election promises. At the same time, this crowd are sophisticated enough to see the double standards that are being put in place by this government. In that you have situations where people are investigated under ECC, but at the same time, corporate mafia issues have not been investigated and resolved. Azam Baki, was allowed to retire, when he turned 60, and after that, there were, I think, no further action with regards to calls for investigation into his own, Azam Baki's own, history, his share ownership and other issues that have been brought up by other MPs, including within the DAP and PH in a previous time, right? So I think there's very little reason for me to see these group of Malay progressive voters wanting to keep their support with Pakatan Harapan in the next general election. So DAP will likely defend all 40 parliamentary seats that it won in 2022. And then also try to defend or try to win, some of the seats that it didn't win. I think this would be, the chances of DP repeating with 40 seats, I think is almost zero. I think some of the mixed seats where the Malay voters form at least 40% of the popular vote, and the Indian voters form another at least 10%, you'll be able to see these seats, being very vulnerable seats for the DAP. I'm talking about seats like Bentong and Raup in Pahang, and even some of the seats like Labin in Johor. All these seats, I think, are seats which DAP won in 2022 under the context of a divided Malay vote between BN and PN. That won't be the case in the run-up towards GE16. Likely BN and PN will come up with their own seat arrangement and electoral pact that will allow them to minimize these kinds of three-corner fights that helped Pakatan Harapan in the past win some of these parliamentary seats.
I want to talk about Anthony Loke, basically. He's led DAP since 2022 and was reappointed as SecGen, right? But after his defeat in Negeri Sembilan, how do you think the AP should focus on accelerating the leadership succession, or do you believe Loke's position as the SecGen will remain secure?
Have the belief that Anthony Loke is the most suitable leader for the position of Secretary General of the DAP for now. He's still a very steady hand. He took a risk in continuing to contest in Chennai because he knew that any other DAP leader would have lost by even a bigger margin. And I think he is somebody that's acceptable among the Malay community in Malaysia. But that being said, I think that the chances of DAP, ending up with maybe 20 seats in the next parliamentary election is pretty high. And in that context, if let's say Anthony Loke resigned because DAP went from 11 to 9 seats, 6 seats in Negeri Sembilan, if let's say DAP goes from 40 to 20 parliamentary seats, I think there will be a lot of pressure on Anthony to also vacate the Secretary General position because of the precedent that he himself has set in Negeri Sembilan. So that is, I think, the most one of the most consequential outcomes with regards to the approach towards G16.
Well, that's Kian Ming himself having to basically detail what his suggestion towards the DAP leadership should be, and of course, Anthony Loke's position within the party itself as SecGen, and whether or not the members have full confidence towards the SecGen. Now, on that, right, according to Kian Ming, he did say that, well, Loke is the best sort of representative for the party itself, not just to the grassroots, but for like an identity at a national level, for all, basically. How would you agree to that?
I mean, to some extent, to a large extent, I agree with that point of view, because I think one of the biggest challenges that DAP faces is to be able to appeal to all Malaysians, regardless of their ethnicity, communal background. And I think for the longest time, and up till today, the DAP has always been the punching bag for other parties to attack them in order to differentiate themselves and also to mobilize Malay Muslim support. That continues to be a problem. And but we also understand from the perspective of the DAP and also trying to represent the core interests of the ethnic Chinese community here in Malaysia, they have to surface these issues. They have to be seen fighting for that community, their space, their interest in this kind of wider competition, marketplace of ideas and policies here in Malaysia.
Right.
And I think Anthony Loke, for the most part, has been a fairly moderate figure, has not been a person who's prone to take on more communal types of rhetorics. And so, taken it all across, he has been, I think, a more positive force that I think improves the appeal of the AP widely to the larger public. And so, they have an asset there. And I think where they have not been able to win in these recent state elections is not particularly due to him, but to the wider consequences of being in a coalition government.
Well, on the question of succession then, right, within the party itself, right, perhaps Loke's stance should be then reviewed, whether or not if he's still considered like has full support or not support after GE16. Would that be better to know, or I mean, to suffice to say in that sense, like?
Yeah, as to the future leadership stewardship of DAP, I think they ought not to change the leader heading into the election. As I said before, I feel that Loke is doing his best within the current circumstances. The circumstances doesn't fully suit them because this is a government, they are part of a coalition, Pakatan Harapan, that is in coalition with other coalitions, and they don't have full majority, and they have to make compromises pretty much along the way. So I think they need to steady the horse and maintain their current position and win back the lost support by at least working it out with the current government to deliver at least some minimum reforms that can then persuade their members that it is more beneficial to be inside rather than outside. Because this is the first time that they've been in government for many, many years, if we take out the period between, 2018, 2020.
Yeah, the
But-
PH 1.0
yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're talking about willing to support, and you're clearly defined what would happen if they stayed and what will happen if they leaves. But if DAP leaves, do you think that Anwar's unity government become fundamentally weaker? Would there be any possibility to that?
Yeah, a DAP departure from the current unity government is going to basically fracture things, because I think whether people like or dislike the unity government over many, many things, the one thing that it is not a government that actually works on identity politics.
Right.
Because it has representation of the major communal parties in the government, and therefore everybody at least is trying to work together and deliver certain things. The drawback is the compromises that has had to come along the way to accommodate so many players in government. If DAP leaves, then I think the restraint that it has on some parts of the party to take out a more communalist rhetoric, I think that restraint is going to go lower. So we might see more of that going on. We already have such rhetorics already happening on the Malay side of the opposition. And so it's unhealthy, broadly speaking, to have people fight over identity issues as opposed to more pressing, socio-economic and broader policy topics.
Okay. Well, Kian Ming also did say that DAP should actually vote to leave, but only resign after the budget is tabled, and at the year end of the parliamentary sitting that we expect lah. Because of course we want to see the reforms such as the AGPP separation and the Prime Minister terms to being realised. But to you, right, having to vote to leave but still retain, would that be contradicting to what the bigger sort of move should be?
Yeah, I think they have to keep the moves very simple because, number one, they're not just representing the issues and the aspirations of the delegates, but it's the wider community. I think broadly speaking, ordinary Malaysian voters, regardless of what race they belong to, they want stability, they want cordial relations amongst the leaders, and they do not want bickering at the top. I mean, we've gone through this period from 2020 to 2022 when we had COVID, we had changes of leadership and administration where people knew it affected the business climate, it affected livelihoods, and it affected the effectiveness of government. So I think people do not want to see turmoil. They want to see these politicians behave maturely and that be able to address the differences, behind closed doors. So I think a lot of people also do not want debates and fights to be coming out in the open. They want people to resolve it and so that they can carry on with their lives.
Right.
And so for DAP to leave government but vote in certain things in a kind of format of a confidence and supply agreement makes it a bit odd because on one hand you're with us but on the other hand you're not. I think it's best to keep things straightforward and simple for
status quo lah, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay. One last thing before we wrap up the show. Ong says that DAP could actually end up with only 20 seats for the upcoming general elections for 16. Berdegar Centre, in terms of findings, polls, would DAP lose their seat?
I mean, it's like this. I mean, a lot of it depends on the electoral boundaries. Most of the DAP seat boundaries are, heavily centered in urban areas with large degree of non-Malay voters. So it depends on how those non-Malay voters are going to react into the future. If they keep maintaining the current level of voter support that we've seen in Negeri Sembilan and in Johor, DAP most likely will keep nearly all of their seats.
Okay.
Where I think they are going to face problems, maybe 4 or 5 seats. Some are the seats that are in Sarawak. They're going to have problems there unless they are able to reach with some kind of accommodation with GPS. Likewise, in Sabah, they have some seats there as well.
Yep.
Whether they can work out something with GRS. If they can do something there, then probably they will keep the seats. And then subsequently in West Malaysia, here in Semenanjung, maybe 3 seats, 4 seats, places like where there's a bit of rural Malay voters, Bentong, Raup, where those places they have some issues.
Okay.
I mean, it's very nice to hear this as well, not because I'm supporter of any party or whatever, but because when Kian Ming said 20 seats, that's like half of the seats that they existingly have. So that's very drastic, right?
Yeah.
So for you to actually say it's not going to be that bad because the sentiments are a bit too early to tell as well, especially when it comes to the Peninsula side, right?
Yeah, well, I think what's playing out is like this, I think in the beginning, yes, there are some dissatisfactions and all that, particularly amongst the base of supporters for DAP. But when they have seen PAS and UMNO working together, I think there's also a reaction to that
Yeah.
maybe, maybe we better keep what we have because we might lose it all. So we are seeing that coming into the fore. And so I think DAP in West Malaysia probably can keep most of their seats. Even in a situation where PAS and UMNO decide to collaborate and just put one Malay candidate in their place.
Yeah.
Well, that's all that we have today.
That's very
unfortunately.
insightful conversation.
Right. Thank you so much, everybody. If you do like this particular episode, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Don't forget to also turn on the notification bell if you haven't already. You'll not only get NSC Beyond the Headlines update, other NSC Online's news reports will be delivered to you. Now, I'd like to thank our guest that's still here on set, Ibrahim Suffian of Merdeka Center. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Now, follow us everywhere. We're on socials, Facebook, X, Threads, TikTok, as well as Instagram.
Don't forget Instagram.
Yes. My name is Amalina Kamal.
And I'm Juliana Jalaluddin. Thank you for watching and take care.
See you next week. Bye.